Let's do a February reading recap. Hi everyone, welcome to my channel, or welcome back. My name is Carly. I read and review historical fiction, and I've got a lot of really fun books to talk about today. Before we get started though, I want to say thank you for joining me, and especially if you're returning, thank you for coming back. If you enjoy historical fiction, particularly newer publications and kind of what's coming and what's worth reading, definitely subscribe and follow along. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. I'm new to BookTube, so I'm still trying to find my folks, and every interaction with this video helps me to do that, so thank you for that. So for February 2025, I decided to do something that I've thought about doing before but have never done, and that was to read exclusively Black authored historical fiction, and I had a great time doing so. I normally read BIPOC authored books throughout the year, but I decided to make 2025 the year that I dedicated the entire month of February to Black authored books that featured prominent, strong Black male and female characters. And I've got a great list of books here, some that I loved, some that I enjoyed, and some that weren't for me. These are in no particular order, but there is one true standout. I'll let you know when we get to that one. Let's start first with the book that I DNF'd, and that is Untethered. I tried listening to this, and I didn't, because I didn't have a physical or an ebook copy. And I don't know, I could not get into this book. I think I got about 35% of the way into the audiobook, and it really wasn't for me. I don't mind character-driven books, but I wasn't connecting to this character, and it didn't have the action that I expect from a book that's not character driven, that's more plot driven. So it just wasn't for me. It doesn't mean I won't pick it up again, but it wasn't my favorite. Next, we're going to talk about my least favorite book of the month, and that happened to be the book that my Fable book club, the BBFL, or Book Besties for Life book club, chose to read for February. And that was Wild, Beautiful, and Free. You know, this book had a lot of promise. There are parts of this book that I felt like were really well developed and fleshed out, and the character was just shining through, and the story was really, heart-wrenching. And then there were times that I was like, what just happened? It's the type of book that I really think could have used a little bit more editing. And what I mean by that is there are moments in time where you're really pulled into the story, and then all of a sudden it's like months later or years later, and there's no explanation of what just happened, and you're kind of scratching your head wondering, what just happened here? I found it choppy and just a little disorganized at times, and overall just not my favorite story. There were some chapters that were really beautifully written, and others that felt more hasty or kind of thrown together. And I hate to say that about any book, because I'm not a writer. I respect the craft, but this was just not the book for me, and most of my BBFL book club members agreed. Now, let me tell you about a book that was for me. I loved it, and I've talked about it already here on BookTube, but I don't know that it's going to be for everybody, and that's Let Us March On by Shara Moon. This is a debut novel about a maid in FDR's White House, Lizzie McDuffie. Her and her husband, who was the valet for FDR throughout his entire presidency, helped to kind of raise his awareness, if you will, of Black issues that the Black community at large were facing. They were made aware of those issues by people who were either writing them letters, approaching them when they were out in public or at church, or they were approached by prominent Black leaders in the community to make sure that FDR was made aware. And they kind of played this quasi-consultative role in FDR's White House. She's credited with helping to give birth to the civil rights movement. What I loved about this book, two things. There is not a lot of action. This is very much a character-driven book. It almost reads like a fictionalized memoir. You really get to know Lizzie and the way that she thinks and kind of how she feels, and I appreciate that in a book. I love plot-driven books, but I also really enjoy a good character-driven novel from time to time, and this was one. I also really loved getting to see FDR through a new lens. As I said on one of my other channels, I am a social worker, so I've learned a lot about FDR throughout my school or throughout my schooling, and he's always painted in this like really positive light. And that's not to say that Sharamoon didn't paint him in a positive light, but there were moments where you really got to see some of the things that were frustrating for Lizzie and for the Black community at large about the way that FDR chose to lead his White House and ignore some of the issues that were happening in the Black community. I really enjoyed this book. I think that folks who love that kind of fictionalized memoir feeling would really, really enjoy this. Think of if you liked The Queen of Sugar Hill, the Hattie McDaniel book, then you're really going to enjoy this. I think that it has a lot of promise. I also decided to read James finally in February, and this book is so good. I mean, everyone is not lying to you, I promise. No one is lying. This book is incredible. It is worth all the hype. I will say that some of the criticism that I have read about this book, I understand now that I have read it. Mostly that it's kind of slow. It's not a very fast-paced book, though there is a lot of action, just like in Huckleberry Finn. You get those quiet moments in between plot points where you are really in the mind of Jim and you're really trying to you're those quiet reflective moments are the moments where Jim is himself trying to kind of figure out what is next for him, what's going to get him closer to his goal. And I just loved that about this book. It's also really, I've said before and I will say again, I feel like this book is a great mirror to what's happening at large within our country. You know, the idea that someone has to hide who they really truly are to fit within a stereotype just to avoid any kind of trouble is really troubling. And that's exactly what Jim does. So for those of you who don't know about this book, this is the story of Jim, who accompanies Huckleberry Finn on his great adventure. This is not the retelling of Huck Finn. This is Jim's story. So you really get to kind of walk in Jim's shoes mentally and physically throughout this book. And the ending, chef's kiss. I will never forget those last chapters of this book. All We Were Promised by Ashton Lattimore. This one I was very excited about and I felt a little let down. Not to say that it's not a great book. It is also a debut and I appreciate that about this book. I think that Lattimore has a lot of promise and I can't wait to see what she does next. This book is about three young women in pre-Civil War Philadelphia. One is born free, one is an escaped slave, and the other is currently enslaved. It's where their stories intersect that the plot of this book takes place. I enjoyed getting to know each of these characters. I loved the fact that this was told mostly in a linear timeline. I really appreciate that with all the multiple points of view and multiple timelines. I'm kind of over that, right? So it does have multiple points of view, but it's a singular linear timeline for the most part. There are a couple of flashbacks to give context to the story, but overall, I did appreciate that about this book. I felt that this book, it was a bit YA at times, which I really struggle with. And you're going to hear me talk about another very popular book and this struggle that I have in just a few minutes. Did I appreciate this book? Yes. Was it my favorite book of the month? No. Do I think that people will like this book and should they read it? Yeah. It's not something I would rush out to buy. It's maybe one if you see it on the shelves at the library or it's available on Libby or whatever, Kindle Unlimited or whatever way you choose to consume books, yeah, pick it up. I think it has a lot of moments that give you a glimpse into that stark reality of what free Black people faced, in addition to and especially enslaved Black people and formerly enslaved Black people faced at this point in time in our country's history. The idea that you could run away to a city and stay there for a period of time and then become free is really fascinating to me, that we had these areas of our country that were safe havens. We have safe haven cities now. And the idea that you would risk everything just to get to that place and live as best you could for that period of time. I mean, it's really fascinating, and it made me really ready to pick up some Underground Railroad books. I've got a few, I'll put them here, a few on my TBR that I can't wait to read. The Thread Collectors is a co-authored book by a Black female author and a Jewish female author. And it's the story of a Black man and a Jewish man who have both joined the Union Army during the Civil War. And it's about not only their experience in the Army and in various battles taking place in the South, but it's also about the women back home that support them. One of the things that I loved the most about this book is how well the two authors incorporated the two different cultures into this book. I feel like I really got to know these characters because of kind of the cultural element, and I got to know their family or their background and kind of what makes them tick. I definitely appreciate that anytime I get that kind of cultural, that glimpse into a character's culture and what makes them feel or think the way that they feel or think. I also really enjoyed the fact that this was, for the most part, a linear timeline. Again, when you have multiple points of view and you're flashing back and forth between different time periods or timelines, it gets really, it's a struggle for me. And I think for other readers too. So I loved that this book, for the most part, stayed on track and it had a very linear structure, despite the fact that it had multiple points of view. You really have at least 4 different points of view. Sometimes it almost feels like a fifth. If you struggle with multiple points of view, this may not be the book for you. I did also love that it's set primarily in the South, in Louisiana. Most of the battles are taking place in Louisiana and Mississippi. One of the female characters is based in New Orleans, and I, being from Louisiana, loved that. Harlem Rhapsody. I feel like I've talked so much about this book but still have kind of missed the mark a little bit. So I have talked about this book on BookTube already, and I will not shut up about it. I really loved this book, even though I almost DNF'd it. So this is the story of Jessie Redmond Fawcett, who was hand-selected by W.E.B. Du Bois to be the literary editor of the preeminent Black newspaper in the 1920s, 30s. Jessie is a writer herself. She's also an amazing editor and has an eye for finding the most talented young Black authors in the community and raising their voice, giving them a place to get their start, if you will. So she's credited with helping to give birth to the Harlem Renaissance. Now, is this book a great character study of Jessie Redmond Fawcett? Yes, you hear a lot about what she did to contribute to the Harlem Renaissance, what she did to help contribute to Black literature in general. It's also the story of the relationship between W.E.B. Du Bois and Jessie Redmond Fawcett. They were in a romantic relationship. W.E.B. was married, so there's this infidelity element, and it overshadows the story throughout much of the book. I struggle with that. I don't read a lot of infidelity storylines unless I'm really, really drawn to the characters. And at first, I wasn't really drawn to Jessie. I couldn't understand why she was making some of the choices that she was making, and I was so frustrated by it. The more I read of this story, I got sucked in. So about 50% of the way into this book, I was like, okay, I think I understand where this is going. And then I got all the validation that I needed when I read the author's note and realized that the author used the infidelity relationship as a literary tool. It really put you, the reader, in the position of society at large, judging Jessie for the choices that she made and allowing her relationship to overshadow all the things that she did to contribute to Black society at the time and long after she was gone. So once I kind of figured out that the author had essentially, it almost felt like duped me into doing exactly what all the people in the book are doing, judging her and allowing her what might be considered poor choices to overshadow her achievements. It was fascinating. That really has stuck with me, and it made me more open to reading stories that I wouldn't necessarily read maybe in the past. So we'll see. Junie. Junie. I was so excited about this book. I love magical realism, paranormal elements, historical horror. So I thought this was going to be an amazing book for me. It was good, but it was not my favorite this month. And the primary reason is two. There were two primary reasons. One, I didn't like all the choices that the author made with the main character. She was very frustrating at times, and I just didn't think that she was all that likable. Number two, it felt very YA. There were, with the exception of one kind of illicit scene, and it's not really even, and maybe a little sprinkling of violence, this could have been a YA novel. And YA is just not my favorite thing. I struggle with it. So Junie is the story of a young Black woman who is enslaved, living on a plantation where she has essentially been raised alongside the young white mistress. So they're like best friends. The young white mistress has allowed her to learn to read and has befriended Junie. Well, about a year before we meet Junie, her sister died suddenly. And there's this mystery around what happened to her sister. Her sister starts to visit her in ghost form and kind of sets out a series of tasks for Junie to achieve in order for her sister's spirit to be freed from this plane. Meanwhile, the young mistress is now of marriageable age, and her father has fallen on hard times and brings in a young man and his sister to meet the young mistress and hopefully make a match. Junie then realizes, well, if young mistress gets married, I have to go with her and leave my family. And that's the last thing that she wants to do because she is very close with her family, despite the fact that they don't all like her. So again, we get this kind of element that she's not the most likable character, and that's because of some of the frustrating things that she does. What I did love about this book, Erin Crosby Eckstein, this is her debut novel, is an incredible writer. I think that she has so much skill, and I cannot wait to see what she does next. This book is so lush and so atmospheric that I think people who love authors like Adrienne Young or Hester Fox are really going to enjoy this author's writing style. I felt like I was walking alongside Junie on the plantation grounds, smelling the same scents that she smelled, experiencing the same bird song, the same moonlight, All of those things that the author does such an incredible job in this book creating that really lush environment that I didn't want to leave, even though I wasn't necessarily enjoying this particular character. So take that for what you will. I do recommend this book, especially if you love stories, you love coming of age stories, you like mystery or paranormal mysteries. This book is definitely going to be for you. Everyone else, literally everyone else loves this book but me. I have two standout favorites, and I'm going to do these in order. Red Clay by Charles Fancher was so good. I loved this book so much. One of the things that I loved the most about it is it's based on Fancher's great-great-grandfather. So you know that these characters and these characters and this story are told with so much love and respect. It is his debut fiction novel. Love that. And it's all about father and son duo who were formerly enslaved and are now free, living in Red Clay, Alabama during Reconstruction era, so post-Civil War. These men are trying to create a life for themselves after the Civil War, after becoming freed, and it's really the story of their struggles to do so. They definitely have triumphant moments in this book, but they also face many, many, many trials and tribulations. So there's some heart-wrenching moments, there's some very hopeful moments. In addition to all of this, there's this other storyline. So when the book first starts, the patriarch of the family has just passed, and this frail little white woman shows up at his funeral, shows up at the family's doorstep and says, "My family used to own yours and I've got stories to tell." And boy, does she. She tells the story of her family and the relationship that her family had with their slaves, who happened to be the father-son duo. And it's her story after the Civil War and kind of the choices that she makes and that led her back to their doorstep. I will say that there were elements of that storyline that I didn't really need. I felt like they were a little unnecessary. They give context to the story and to the choices that are made. But overall, I think I could have done with a little bit less of that. However, I think this is a strong debut that I really enjoyed, and I hope everyone reads this. I think this book is going to be great for anyone who enjoys a good combination of character and plot driven, because there's a lot of things going on in this book. There are a lot of characters. However, it doesn't get too messy. Before I talk about my favorite book, I feel the need to mention one of the books. Actually, I have two books that I don't have physical copies of. So before I tell you my favorite book, I want to talk about those two books. One is Good Dirt by Charmaine Wilkerson. I have not read Black Cake. Having read Good Dirt, I understand why people love her writing, but this was not my favorite book. I almost DNF'd this book, but I decided to stick with it, and I'm glad that I did. The ending really elevated the story for me and made it worthwhile. However, I will say that I don't think this book is going to be for everyone. This is the story of a young Black woman who essentially has just been left at the altar. She's been left at the altar, and she decides that she's going to escape over to France to kind of not necessarily start over, but to get away. So one of the things that we learn about her is she's not famous, if you will. However, she's infamous. Years ago, her brother was shot dead essentially right in front of her in their home during a burglary. What we find out is that her family is a very affluent Black family living in a predominantly affluent white area. During the burglary, a precious artifact, family artifact, is broken. Her brother was holding this centuries-old jar that has been passed down throughout her family for years and years and years. It was made by a formerly enslaved man, had this mysterious inscription on the bottom. As you can imagine, the trauma that she experienced seeing her brother killed when she was 10 years old has stuck with her. So later, as an adult, she carries a lot of that trauma with her, and it impacts her relationship, the one that she's formed with this young white man who ultimately leaves her at the altar. The book is all about where these two storylines of this woman's life intersect and how she starts over. Having said that, it is also the story of everyone else in the story. Every single character that we meet in this book has a point of view, has a chapter told, at least one chapter told from their point of view. So as you can imagine, this book is very chaotic. I did choose to listen to this book because I didn't have a physical or an e-copy of this book. And I think that that contributed to some of my frustration with it, is that it literally has so many points of view. It's also not a linear timeline. So we may be current day at one point, the next chapter we're 10 years before, the next chapter we're 150 years before that, then we're 60 years ago. You get my point. It is chaotic. Is it beautifully written? Absolutely. Would I have liked to see a few less points of view? Yes. What I do appreciate about this book is the way that the author weaved all of these stories together in the end. That really was masterful. The other book that I do not have a physical copy of, but did read in February, was Sisters in Arms. This is a World War II era novel about two young women from essentially kind of different walks of life living in Harlem, and they both decide to join the 6888. The 6888 is a group of Black female soldiers and officers who ultimately, as we learn in the Netflix show and in other books that I've read, end up being sent over to Europe to help with the post. They help to ensure that all of the enlisted soldiers fighting in Europe received mail and packages from back home. Now, what I will say about this book is we do not get to Europe until like the last, I would say, almost third of this book. We spend the first 2/3 of the book in Harlem, in boot camp, and in various other settings. And it takes a while to get to the good part. I felt like, who is it, Milhouse in that Simpsons episode? When are we gonna get to the fireworks factory? I felt very much like that in this book. However, what I did enjoy is I thought that the character development was really great, and I love the conversational style in which this author wrote her dialogue. It felt fresh, it felt new, and I really appreciated that. So overall, this one did work for me, and I'm very interested to see what this author does next. Lastly, I have to tell you all about my absolute favorite book of the month that might also be in my running so far this year for favorite book of the year, and that is Happy Land by Dolan Perkins Valdez. I didn't think that she could top Take My Hand, which is my favorite Black authored historical fiction, by the way. I think that this book might do that. And the reason why is it just is so well done. Don't get me wrong, Take My Hand is incredible. It is an incredible social justice story that everyone should read, regardless of whether you enjoy historical fiction or not. I think that it is that good of a book that literally everyone should read it. This book is very different. So Happy Land is all about a group of formerly enslaved South Carolinians who essentially walk up the hill as described in this book, cross the border into North Carolina, into the Appalachian Hill Country. And Appalachia, yeah, into the Appalachian, yeah, Appalachian Hill Country. We're gonna go with that. To start a community of their own. They enter into an agreement with a white woman and her son to work the land owned by this white woman, and eventually they buy some of that land. The community that they create is modeled after either what they know and remember or what they've been told about communities in Africa. They appoint a king and queen who govern the community alongside elders. The queen of this community is the focus of the book. Before we meet her, however, we meet her descendants, one of which is I would say 40-ish. I don't know that we ever really find out. 40-ish-year-old woman living and working in DC who is stressed to the max. She has this young adult daughter with whom she has, not necessarily a strained relationship, but it's not what it once was. And she has a almost non-existent relationship with her grandmother when she suddenly receives a request from her grandmother, come home to our land in North Carolina. Grandmother, mother, and granddaughter have this weird triangular relationship. Grandmother and mother do not talk. So by going to see grandmother, she's kind of going behind mom's back. So there's this family drama element. Once she gets there, she really starts to learn more about her grandmother, someone that she hasn't really had a relationship with for many, many years, if ever. And her grandmother's story is really captivating to her. Grandmother is fighting to keep the land that she's been living on for years and years and years that's essentially been stolen from her. This is part of that tract of land that the queen once bought many, many years ago. So there is a racial injustice element to this book that is so poignant and so moving, and I want everyone to read it. I want everyone to meet these characters. I loved both of these storylines, the modern day and the historical time storylines were both so well done. I will say that one of the elements of the historical timeline might not be everyone's favorite. It didn't bother me. And I don't want to give anything away about it. So if you message me, if you really want to know. Not only is the cover absolutely stunning, Dylan Perkins Valdez writing is incredible. It is, again, very lush and atmospheric, though not quite the same as Junie. You definitely feel like you're walking in this beautiful garden in North Carolina that the young woman finds herself in when she goes home to see her grandmother for the first time in years. You really get the sense of what life was like for this community living up in the Appalachian Hills, and you really get a sense for the struggle that came along with being Black in that Reconstruction period, trying to kind of piece together a life that resembles your own after being enslaved. So those are my February reads. I really want to know, have you read any of these? What were your thoughts? Are any of these on your TBR? Have I convinced you to read any of them? Or have I convinced you to not read any of them? Let me know in the comments. I'm really eager to hear from you and to learn more about you as a reader.